Did you hear what I said? Or was I
You
muted?
told me to get a glass of water. I
Oh,
already have water.
okay. Because I'm just learning all the technology. So there's Skype, which is how you and I are talking right now. And then there's this program that feeds it out to the internet. And so I had both of us muted, but I just wasn't sure if I have anyways. So that's interesting. That's good to know. Oh, rats. Oh, somebody said that's interesting. Off mute. I'm taking you off mute now. Okay, here we go. Hey, hi everybody. It's Elise Chenier here from Simon Fraser University, the Department of History, where I work as a historian, an oral historian of the queer past. And I'm really glad that you've joined us this week. Let me make sure I'm unmuted. Yes, I'm unmuted. Okay. I have my microphone here. and I'm unmuted, so I think things are going pretty good. So I like to begin by acknowledging that I'm on Coast Salish territories here, the unceded stolen land of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam people. And I'm cleaning up my office right now. It's end of term and it's time to tidy up. And I found this really beautiful thing. Let me see if I can get that right. That I have used in certain presentations, and it gives you an idea of the incredible richness of the people. So this is just the different languages that were spoken along the West Coast, and I'll post that below the YouTube video and on Facebook and stuff. People want to see it, but it's really, really gorgeous. So I really appreciate the beauty of this land, and part of my work is being committed to doing the I mean, reconciliation, it's not a great word, but doing the kind of repair work that needs to be done. And as a historian, I feel like I have a particular role to play. And so the reason why we are gathered here today is because on March 8th, we opened our first public exhibit called An Army of Lovers. It's very exciting. It's quite beautiful. It's based on work that a lot of my students did, supplemented by Kirsty Goodfellow, a student in the class, and also my own additional interviews that I did. And of course, the opening happened right at the time where things were really taking off in terms of COVID here in British Columbia, and of course across North America. So the exhibit, while it still stands at the Vancouver City Archives, of course, nobody can go and see it. So we thought, since we have the technological capacity, let's bring the exhibit to you. So I'm very delighted to do that. And how we've been doing it each week is by bringing in, so the exhibit is a series of 18 banners. Oh, Marcia is here from Roberts Creek. Yes, thank you, Marcia, for saying that. I would like folks who are listening in, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook, if you could say hello and tell us where you're tuning in from. It helps me to know who's out there and who's listening in. So thank you, Marcia, and welcome. Oh, it says there's 7 comments. Sorry. Okay, here we go. Hold on. We've got, somebody is here from Kalamazoo, Michigan. Kay Rivers, welcome. Welcome. Margaret Dragoo, welcome to you too. Let's see. Drew, it says Drew-ish from Montreal. Welcome to you as well. And Cynthia, who was our guest last week, she wrote, I love the point in Nancy's pre-interview that what we had been told was so wrong. But yet it felt so right. And thank you so much, Cynthia. Yeah. And Jane Ellison from the sunny West End of Vancouver, is tuning in. And Jane, I know Jane because she teaches these amazing boing boing classes. So free movement dance, which are just absolutely wonderful. And Susan Johnston tuning in from Victoria. So great. Oh, and Cynthia Cole. It lets us know that she's from Spud Palace, which is the name of her home here in Vancouver. So a really warm welcome to everyone. And lastly, I wanted to say that to acknowledge that it is Mother's Day weekend. And I just want to say a couple things about that. So first of all, I want to acknowledge that a lot of us mother in all kinds of different ways. We may not necessarily have birthed a child, but we do all kinds of, like, quote unquote mothering things. And I know for me as a feminist, like there are these tensions in feminism around sort of rejecting motherhood and the way in which it's constraining and constricting on women. But then there's also this other strain of, like, embracing motherhood and valuing it, giving it the value that it deserves. And I'm a Gemini, so I can handle that tension. And Nancy's a Gemini too, so I'll be interested to know you are? No, you're not a Gemini. Oh, okay. Who was I just talking to that's a Gemini? Anyway, sorry about that. Okay. So yeah, lots of interesting tensions in feminism. Yeah. So okay, let me move along here, and welcome to Judith Quinlan from coming to us from Victoria. Okay, so what do I do next? Here we go. Okay, now I'm going to show you the web address. So this is the address to the website where you can see all the banners. So it's not quite as amazing as seeing them in person, but it's pretty close. I have good fortune of working with some really wonderful graphic designers. I'll give a shout out to Holographics, that's Tammy Hall, and to Left Right Minds, who does web development for me. They're just fantastic. So that's the web address. Let's see, what do I have with banner? What is that? I make all these little, it's the same. Oh, here we go. So this is Nancy's banner. And Nancy, why don't I bring you in? I'll bring you in now. So just so you know, Nancy, folks can see you now. So we're screening you now. Yeah, hi, hi to you. Okay, let me put myself in, and I wonder how I can. Sorry, the one thing I haven't quite figured out about this. There we go. Okay, I've got you on the right side of the screen. Is how to get the screen divide to work the way I want. Anyway, so. On one side, they see you. On the other side, they see your banner. And so each banner tells a little bit about the person. And we have some photos from their past. And then it has a link to the oral history interview that was done with them. And maybe I'll just add here, for those of you who don't know, the Allot Archives is my own project of archiving oral testimonies. So it's mostly oral history. I'm an oral historian, so that's where the idea came from. But people have donated to us radio shows. Like there was a very long-running lesbian radio on Co-op Radio here. So we have some of those in there. So I just decided to open it up to any type of audio record that might be out there. And the reason why I did that was, there was this whole period in the 80s of 90s of like recovering the past through oral testimony. Oh, sorry, everybody's seeing the banner and not me, and I'm the one talking. Sorry about that. I'll just close that there. But that all these interviews that people had done and so much work to create were just sort of sitting in attics and basements and on shelves, and including my own. So once I got a job here at Simon Fraser University, we had a lab where you could digitize old cassettes. So I just decided, well, that would be a really good thing to do for the community. And so the archives was born. All right, so that's everything you need to know about how we get to this particular historical moment. So welcome, Nancy.
Hi, Elise. Hi, everyone.
I'm really delighted to have you here. And what I've been doing every week is talking to people about their opening quote. The quote that we use at the top of the banner, and sort of starting from that point. And now I've gone and closed it, so I can't actually see it. But it said something along the lines of not having the language to articulate who you were. So why don't we start by, could you tell us when and where you were born, and a little bit about the circumstances of growing up and then coming into that period of discovery in your own life?
Sure. I'll knock off the demographics. I was born in 1953 in Kingston, Ontario. My dad was an army guy, and he was going to army school. So I spent the earliest months of my life in Kingston, then moved to Camp Petawawa. I basically grew up in Ontario. But I have to say, my little magpie mind was latched onto two things that you said in your intro. One was about Co-op Radio and the Lesbian show, and I'm just going to throw this out. One of the first things I did after I moved to Vancouver in 1978, I'm the age of 24, 25. Within the next year, I had gotten myself onto the Lesbian show at Co-op Radio and read the Scum Manifesto, Valerie Solanas' Scum Manifesto, which was a book that had always fascinated me and terrified me. She had an attitude, but she was also very eloquent, and she was naming things that needed to be named. So somewhere in Co-op Radio's records is my weedy little voice reading the Scum Manifesto. And the other thing that my magpie mind took me to when you talked about it being Mother's Day is remembering a very hilarious memory I have with my mother. So this is when I'm in my mid-20s. I came out to my mother under duress when I was 15. So this is maybe 10 years later. Things have settled down. My mother was actually very good to me about it. And we've gone out to lunch. I'm visiting her, and we've gone out to lunch together. And the topic of my homosexuality comes up, and it's very ginger, and it's not completely comfortable. But I have been curious about a great aunt in my family, my grandfather's sister Jean, who never married, who was an artist, who I met a handful of times. So I thought, well, I'm going to ask Mom. So I said, Mom, do you think Aunt Jean might have been a lesbian? And my mom said, well, I'm not sure about Aunt Jean, but I'm pretty sure Aunt Mary was. So from another side of the family. So mothers, yeah. But what was your original question after?
Well, tell me about your mom and your relationship with your mom. Why not?
Oh, well, my mom is still in the land of the living. My mom is 92 years old, living in a seniors residence in Ontario. I was her fourth child and her third daughter. And, I think I was a beloved youngest daughter for the first 10 years of my life. And then I was a benignly neglected middle child for the next 10 years of my life. And I think that benign neglect actually served me very well as far as being a little lesbian in the 60s. I didn't have a lot of attention paid to me by my parents in a good sense. My mother was tormented by my dress, my lack of fashion sensibility. I do remember, I think the year I was in grade 8, my mother insisted on dressing me all in pink, like pink tank tops, pink shorts, pink. It was like, but I didn't have the wherewithal to dress myself, so that was a bad summer. But yeah, no, I have an affectionate relationship with my mom. And when I came out to her and when I was at the age of 15, she responded very, very compassionately. And then she and my dad did the only thing that they knew to do, which was they shipped me off to a psychiatrist. So this is 1968, I guess. Yeah, 1968. So first they sent me off to the family doctor, who gave me an internal examination, which was this is a medical abuse story. So I got shipped off to the family doctor who gave me an internal examination. And believe me, that was horrific. And I remembered sort of sobbing in his examination room, and he kind of told me that I seemed normal. And then, gave the referral to the child psychiatrist who I saw for the next 2 years. Yeah.
Wow, that is unbelievable.
And, many years later, my mom, this is interesting how this works out. My mother was an Anglican, and she was affiliated with a parish that was a progressive parish. It was actually the church in Ottawa that was in the center city and was the home to the queer community. So my mother kind of had her consciousness raised about gayness by her church affiliation, and many years later apologized to me for having sent me off to this psychiatrist. And I was really able to say to her, Mom, that was what you were told to do. I mean, that was the response that parents were given by the authorities. Well, that's a mental illness. Ship her off. Mm. So, yeah.
What was that? What was the therapy like? Is that okay to talk about?
Oh, sure. It's totally okay. I got off really light.
Yeah.
I got off light with my parents. I got off light with my shrink. So my shrink, I really mean this. I'm pretty sure she suffered from a thyroid condition. She hinted at it at some point, and she slept through. My memory is of her kind of dozing on the chair, and I'm kind of sitting there in a state of like, I'm not going to bring up this unmentionable subject. I really was not going to be bringing. I didn't. I mean, I knew I had a problem, but of course, the problem wasn't that I was gay. I mean, I just knew there was a problem in this situation, but the problem was homophobia. And I wasn't going to bring up my problem. So I saw her for two years, and we never once talked about homosexuality.
Oh.
Yeah, not. She once asked me why I was afraid of men, and I was pissed off at that question because I didn't think I was afraid of men.
Mm.
So that was an offensive question. And she once asked me if my father, oh yeah, I'm remembering this. She once asked me if my father had ever complimented me on being a pretty little girl. And I had a really nice relationship with my dad. I was actually my dad's son. I was the closest thing. My dad had 5 daughters, and I was the closest thing to a son that he had. We were very close. So that also seemed like stupid questions. So, I mean, I reflect back on it and think no harm was done to me by my experience with psychiatry, but no good was done either.
Well, I'm really glad no harm was done. Not everybody got off so easy.
Oh, well, actually, the second year that I was going to the shrink, and that is so true what you just said, I had conceived a love interest in a girl my age. Well, she was a year older than me, so she was 17 or 18. And it was very convenient that she happened to live in the neighborhood that my psychiatrist lived in. So I would go to my shrink's appointment, and then I would go over to my friend's house and just sort of like sit at her feet and adore her. And I remembered thinking, some part of me thought, this is kind of weird. But mainly I thought this is really convenient. They live in the same neighborhood. At that time, I was living out in the country. My family was living out in the country, and there was no public transit. So it was really convenient to have the shrink and the wannabe girlfriend in the same neighborhood.
You know, if I can just throw in, my PhD thesis was on the whole post-war idea of sexual deviation. And so I wanted to look at how it is that what was this concept of sexual deviation, and how is it that homosexuals, I was genuinely interested to know how homosexuality became collapsed with pedophilia, and then the convergence of mental health ideas and the law. And I always like to point out when I'm particularly talking to women is that although I had done my master's thesis on lesbian bar culture, and I had wanted to do lesbians for my PhD, I was a single mom at the time, and I was worried that I wouldn't be able to do enough interviews to complete my PhD in a timely manner. And I also believed that a PhD on lesbian history would not get me a job. And I was probably, so I did a topic that was mostly about men, and also medical history and legal history, so touched more conventional historical areas, and I think I was right in that call anyway. So I always like to just acknowledge that there is still sexism in my industry, and one has to be strategic about those things. Anyhow, so, and also in the all the documentaries you read about the 50s and 60s, it's always like McCarthyism and then psychiatrists giving shock therapy and lobotomies to homosexuals. And I was like, I wanted to know, did that really happen? Like, how true is that? And one of the things I discovered, which isn't exactly what happened to you, but this idea that everybody was like very sort of evil and trying, in these very horrible ways to fix homosexuals, that this woman who was clearly this woman was ignorant, like thinking you're afraid of men, and really didn't understand the issue. But she wasn't sending you off to shock therapy and lobotomies. And in fact, I actually found that and there's a lot of serendipity with archival work, so I'm not saying it's representative. You can't survey all the psychiatrists and what they were doing in the 1950s and 60s, but the stuff I was able to uncover showed that actually a lot of psychiatrists were incredibly critical of the way homosexuality was being constructed as a danger, and didn't see it as a danger at all, and talked about needing to help homosexuals adjust basically to homophobia. That's not the word they used at the time, but help them adjust to the climate. And the ambiguity in that is, did they mean to not have sex? Like sometimes that meant learning how to suppress your sexual desire, but sometimes it meant learning how to conduct yourself in a safe way, so not going to bars where you might get arrested and stuff like that. So I just wanted to give a little what I know about the broader historical context of what psychiatrists were doing at that time. And Amanda Latour, also a historian studying the same area, and she's studying youth and teenage experience, and she writes. And I'm sharing this with folks there. And Nancy, I know you can't see it, but she just writes yes. So I'm assuming that came up in. So I'm assuming, Amanda, you're finding that in your own research too. So it's kind of interesting. So I'm glad that that was your experience. Anyway, sorry about that little.
I want to say something more about that.
Go ahead.
So I think I was probably fortunate that I was having my psychiatric experience while I was still living at home. I was not an independent young person who was going to be running off the rail and being deviant in public, because I was, and I had, a number of years later, I'm living in Toronto, and I make my way to that famous first lesbian conference that happens in Toronto. I'm not sure what year that was, but, I trundle myself. My ear is, I'm still the only lesbian that I've ever known, but I have my ear to the ground, and I'm aware that there's this conference going on, and off I go to it. And it was one of those weekends that lasted about 5 years. I mean, I have so many memories from that conference. But one of them is going out to dinner with a group of women who I didn't know. We all sort of met each other at a picnic that happened on Toronto Island associated with this lesbian conference. And it's a summertime. The five of us go out to dinner. And of the five of us, three of us have actually been psychiatrized around being lesbians. And two of the women had been institutionalized. They were older than me. They were probably in their late 20s, early 30s. And I can just remember us being at that dinner, and there was just a kind of a collective chest tightening, I guess you could say, about how, how wrenching and evil all of that really was. And I remember thinking, boy, did I ever get off light.
Yeah. And, we both know Persimmon Blackridge, who writes and talks and produces beautiful art around madness, and who's also queer. And, one of the first oral histories that I read, that I worked with, sorry, I need to put myself up here. Was done by a group in Toronto called Lesbians Making History, and she wrote. It was so interesting. So her mother had her institutionalized, which was common, right? I don't want to suggest it wasn't, that it was rare. I don't want to give that impression. Anyhow, but the wonderful thing about it was that the story she tells is that while she was institutionalized, she realized she was normal because she meets other lesbians, so and they all tell her, oh, well, when you get out, this is where you need to go. This is the bars. This is the neighborhood to hang out in. This is the early 70s, I think. And so it was funny that, she gets put in a psych ward to learn that she's normal, right? It was kind of a good. So that was her way of relating to that experience. But the fact that there were, so it was a bit of it was both, right? It was and how shitty is that, right? That it just depends on the luck of the draw. The last thing I'll say about it is the other piece I'll never forget reading was by a guy named I think it might have been that Michael Reardon, but I'm not sure. Anyways, he published a piece in the Body Politic, and he talked about, and maybe this is a good segue actually to bring us back to you. I want to hear so much more from, and I'll stop talking history, but he wrote a great piece in the Body Politic, which was a really important gay liberation magazine newspaper, in that came out of Toronto. And he talked about how by day he was going to see a psychiatrist to help him sort of cure his gayness, and by night he was going to gay dances. And the psychiatrist was helping him, trying to help him, because of course there was and is no cure for being gay. But anyways, so the psychiatrist accepted the premise, right, that gayness could be cured, and was trying to help him. And then until one night at the dance, he sees his psychiatrist, and that's it, right? Then he gives up on treatment, and I'll never forget that story. So, but I think it's another piece that sort of paints a good picture of that era, right? That everybody, even the psychiatrists, are kind of caught up in this system. Yeah, it's just, anyways. Okay, so back to you. So this is going on, but you're describing that. Yeah, Cynthia says, read Still Sane by Sheila Gohilly and Persimmon Blackridge. And look, there it is, right at your fingertips. Yeah, an extraordinary book. People outside of Canada probably don't know about it. But certainly everyone in BC, all the lesbians in BC do. Maybe not the younger generation, but it's extraordinary. I mean, her work is extraordinary. So yeah, so take us back then, because we talked a little bit about what that time was like, and feelings of desire, and you in our pre-interview you talked about when you meet someone that you have feelings for, that you're attracted to, that you want to be with, that you just kind of go for it. So I don't know, you want to talk a little bit about what that was like as a teenager? Being a teenager is such a weird time. So what was that like for you?
Well, yeah, I don't know if I can say much more than I said in the pre-interview, but I am struck by how, despite the sort of shameful, prohibited nature of the desire, there was not going to be any censoring of it in terms of my conduct. And of course, my boat in that regard is being floated by a few different things. I mean, there is a gay liberation movement of sorts happening, rumbling in the background of my late teen years. There's also the hippie movement and the idea of, it's all very cliche, but the idea of free love. So, I'm fortunate enough to be a young, desiring person during a time where desire is being named. Sexuality outside of, I guess it's called marriage, was being normalized, and as was, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So there's no question that that kind of loosening of things was going on. And, there's also an indelible connection in my mind between being a lesbian and political liberation movements of all sorts. I can't talk about being a lesbian in the 1960s and 1970s without talking about feminism, without talking about anti-war movements, anti-nuke movements, farmers' rights movements, any number of things that were all actually about challenging the straight world. Mm. And I mean the straight world in a way more expansive sense than just the heterosexual world. I mean, that was sort of the least of it. Heterosexuality was clearly like a problem. It was mainly a problem for heterosexuals, so you know what I mean. Yeah. It's kind of like lesbians being accused of man-hating. It's like, no, if you want to find a man-hater, find some heterosexual women. That's where you'll find the real man-haters, because they know what they're talking about. This idea of the straight world, the world of conventional work, the world of conventional relationships, the world of conventional family lives, the world of conventional mind states. I mean, drugs was an important part of my life, and not that anybody would have called me a druggie, but just this idea that everything needs to be dismantled and everything needs to be experienced, and that was really that was a flavor that I was able to participate in, that I found in my milieu. Mind you, I was also drawn to that milieu. And I realize now that it was a kind of a specialized zone. Mm. But I'm encouraged by that, because it makes me realize, there's always little specialized zones going on that we don't necessarily know about, but that are incubators. They're spaces that are both responding to things in the culture, and they're creating responses in the culture. God, am I getting a little theoretical here? Anyway, I mean, I use the word incubate.
We're open to theory. Theory's good. But I would like to talk a little bit about desire. I mean, it could be, so maybe there's a nice connection between the desire for other women and what that feels like, discovering that, and then like literally, but also figuratively feeling your way through that and into that, right? In a world where it's not represented, like what does lesbian intimacy look like, right? It's got to be invented. And then maybe how that's related to the desire for a different world, something better. Can you talk about that? I don't mean to, it's a big one. I'm kind of putting you on the spot there.
No, it's desire. I don't know that would have been a word that I would have used when I was in my 20s, but in terms of falling in love with a woman, I mean, I didn't fall in love with women in general. And I actually was never a person who thought lesbians were the best. I thought, lesbians are a mixed bag. I mean, they are. But there would be particular people, women, who I would fall in love with, and that would, and I've come to realize, because this has been categorized, that there's people who have sexual desire for people that they don't like, and then there's people who have no sexual desire for people that they love madly. Well, I think I fall into the category of my desire and my heart are sort of in sync with one another. So desiring somebody was as much to desire their body as it was to desire an intense engagement with their minds, their souls, their spirits, their way of being in the world, their way of seeing the world. And if they paid a little attention to me, that would be nice too. But I actually think that was kind of somewhat not necessarily the point. I was more interested in paying attention to them. So, but yeah, desire is inarticulate, right? I mean, it's of the body, it's of the energies. So, I felt very fortunate to find myself in a community where my desire was sometimes reciprocated, and where people around me modeled really thoughtful ways of being in relationships.
Yeah, say a little bit more about that.
Well, I arrived in Vancouver in my mid-20s. It's the late 1970s. And I've missed sort of the first iteration of whatever went on around talking about being a lesbian, being a butch or not, about sexual ethics, about non-monogamy. But I sort of arrived at a point where non-monogamy was considered very important, like to be non-possessive, to be sexually adventurous, but not reckless, adventurous, but not harmful to other people. And that you paid a lot of attention to your relationships, but you weren't totally preoccupied with them. What you were preoccupied with was changing the world. That was your preoccupation. But within that, and I think this is a flavor of the Vancouver community, and I know I'm talking about a very small community, we had a lot of fun. I mean, within the first few months of being in Vancouver, I had been taken over to a Gulf island. We had no consciousness at that time that those were Gulf islands that, where Japanese farmers had their land taken away from them, and that Gulf Islands that had been the territory of the Coast Salish peoples. That was not our consciousness, but we were going to build cabins. We were going to drop acid. We were going to have our version of our sexual adventures together that involved a lot of sensuality and a lot of nature. And it was fun. We had a lot of fun. We worked really hard. We had a really good work ethic, but I don't think we felt as burdened by work as I think we do today.
Oh God, yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's even painful to think about, the burden of work today. But anyways, so there's the question I want to ask. What was sexually adventurous in the 1970s? Like, I think people today, so young people today, would have a very maybe different idea of what that means. So in the context you were in, what did that mean?
Oh, I don't know if I'm the person to speak to that.
Well, to you. I mean, you said it was, that's how you characterized it. Just for you. You're not speaking for the whole culture, just for you.
Oh, I'd rather speak for the whole culture. No, just oh, I don't, yeah. It's funny. I really feel kind of inarticulate about that. So I just sort of think about pleasure and bodies and joy. Yeah, and lack of self-consciousness.
Marsha just added, yes, we had a lot of fun. I mean, I remember, so one of my, if I may I throw something in?
Oh, go ahead,
Because
please.
I know it's you being interviewed, but I'm finding I'm wanting to become more conversational with these. But so my time period is different. Like I'm like 15 years behind you. But so 1990 is when I come out. Okay, I'm just Judith Quinlan writes, non-monogamy, getting out of female-male roles. Yeah, for sure. And Cynthia Cole writes, yes, we had a lot of fun. I hope you're still having fun, ladies. But I remember, okay, I won't say her name, but my first girlfriend, so not the first woman I had sex with, but my first girlfriend. So I had been a heterosexual and loved sex as a teenager. But when I discovered dyke culture, it was super exciting for me because I got slut shamed in school, and my whole teenage years were seriously traumatized. I ended up dropping out of high school because it was so effing awful. And I genuinely never understood why I was slut shamed and the guy who I had sex with was a stud. And it's hard to believe I was that naive, but I truly was. I just couldn't understand it, and it seemed so unfair to me. And so when I discovered feminism, and I had always been interested in women sexually, but I always saw it pornographically. Like I would have a fling with a woman, and that was something I wanted to do. So I saw it in those kinds of terms. So when I discovered dyke culture, I was so excited because sex was like so positive. You weren't shamed. You were embraced for loving sex and enjoying sex. And so I remember. So what I'm trying to say is I had a lot of sexual experience, but not a lot with a woman. Anyway, so my first serious girlfriend, it was her first time having sex with a woman, and I remember we were laying together on my couch, and she said, after we kissed, she said, "What do we do?" And I said to her so joyfully, "Whatever we want." And to me, that and our what I remember about the sex we had is how much we laughed, and now that is a requirement of sex for me now, is you have to laugh. If you are not laughing, and I tell my students this all the time, I think half of them think I'm crazy, but you know, especially for my young students, like, because especially like sex is so serious, you know, and it's like you know, it's like this intense thing and the orgasm and all that, and to me it's like it should be joyful and fun and this kind of adventurous discovery. So for me, that's what I loved about it, is all that shit of like it following a certain pattern and having this kind of intensity, this expectation of the orgasm and that intensity, like, and that it could become just this kind of discovery. For me, that's what it was. I don't know. Does any of that resonate for you?
Well, I find it interesting what you're saying. I mean, one of the things I found myself remembering when you were told the story about necking with this, that's old fashioned, that's me dating myself, is that in the first number of years that I was in Vancouver, I kind of slept with all of my friends. I mean, and my apologies to those of you who I didn't sleep with. I guess I was just busy that weekend, but no, and that was completely standard. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, that there would be very early on in getting to know somebody, you'd have sex with each other, and it would be a pretty happy, pretty funny, and then you'd carry on, and then there were other people that you had a relationship with. And sometimes it was okay with them if you continued to have sex with a friend. Sometimes it really wasn't. So yeah. But you know, it's interesting, Elise. One of the other things that I found myself thinking of is I saw a lot of naked women in that time. And then, you know, you're out like women would be taking their clothes off for any number of reasons. You know, they needed to go and chop some wood, so let's take our clothes off and chop some wood. Or, you know, you're down at a beach having your LSD cocktail hour, and the clothes are. And I just remembered really enjoying seeing naked women, because grown up in a culture where I never saw my mother's naked body. So, you know, there was something pretty wonderful about that too. Yeah. I hope you're not listening, Mom.
Oh my God. Okay. Luna Norden wrote, "No Sunday lovers." What does that mean? No Sunday lovers. Do you know what that means? I don't know. Luna, you have to tell us. What does that mean? What's a Sunday lover? You don't know, Nancy? That term?
No, it's, yeah, I'm not familiar with it.
Like nobody stays over beyond the weekend? I don't know. Oh, Esther writes, "I'm remembering never getting out of bed all day, getting up, going out to get something to eat and coming back home and getting back into bed again. Sex between women was so good, so intense, so free, as we say today, so hot." Yeah, Esther. That's what I'm talking. Oh, here, I'll share that so everybody can see that. That's what I'm talking about. Me, I would also go and get cigarettes. Heavy smoker in those days, as many of us were. Did you smoke?
Yeah, sure.
Did you? I didn't know you did acid. I mean, I guess, huh?
I was never an addicted smoker. I bummed a lot of cigarettes off of people, and then I slept with them. No. Just kidding. Just kidding. Yeah, we all smoked. I remembered when I worked at Press Gang for numbers. I mean, I was a member of the Press Gang Collective, and we weren't all smokers, but many of us were smokers, and the way we dealt with that is only one person could smoke at any given time during a meeting. You know.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to let you know that Luna says that Sunday lovers is referring to the openness and honesty that Cynthia was referring to. Oh, okay. You have to tell me more about that later, Luna, because I still don't get the connection between that. And then Judith Quinlan writes, "Michigan Music Festival, acres of naked women became common." Did you ever go to that?
No, I didn't. I go to the, no, I didn't.
I went to one, and I have to say that's the first time I took off my top in public, and holy moly, It sounds ridiculous, but that was, well, it sounds like you were in environments where women did that. I wasn't, right? Like the 90s, that kind of culture wasn't there anymore, but, oh, well, maybe it was, but not where I was. Anyhow, that was like so amazing to walk around topless. Yeah. Luna also writes, our other lovers were known to each other. Nobody was secretive about other lovers. Yeah. I mean, you know what would be really interesting? And I think we did, when we had a Lesbian Lives Live before, we talked about this a little bit, poly. But it'd be interesting to talk about the difference between polyamory, and similarities between polyamory today and non-monogamy of yesteryear. Yeah, I mean, I'm really thrilled that young people are. It's never something, as I said, and when I did that interview, for me, I always want to be monogamous when I'm single and polyamorous when I'm in a relationship. So it never really worked out for me. Although now I'm like, ugh, polyamory. That's like, whoa. I mean, really, I can barely make myself a coffee in the morning. Never mind manage something like that. But
Well, it's also interesting to reflect on, back in the day, where did you find your lovers? You found them at work, so that we're all working in feminist collectives or we're involved in feminist activist groups, and they're crawling with lesbians. So that's where, and you find them at home because many of us were living in communal households. And if you don't find it at home, then your housemate's girlfriend is your girlfriend, 3 months later. So the community was the community was the fishing grounds, if that makes any sense.
yeah, the fishing grounds. Well, yeah, I want to choose a different metaphor, but I gotcha.
I was thinking of plenty of fish.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay. I stand corrected. Esther Newton says that she tried non-monogamy. Disastrous. Never worked for me. And Luna Norden further clarifies that the Sunday lover was the secret affair, the lover that one might only see discreetly on Sundays. Ah, so now that makes a lot of sense to me. Okay, well, believe it or not, Nancy, it's like 12:45, and we haven't even. I feel like we haven't had even a proper interview yet. I think like you and I could just sit around and talk every weekend and just like laugh our heads off. Esther Shannon writes, that's, yeah, exactly. Esther Shannon writes, we used to sing Love Hurts and laugh our heads off. Also, having been a hippie before a dyke, I saw lots of naked bodies and there was lots of sex, almost always straight. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's that. But there is one thing that we haven't told people about us, Nancy.
What's that?
Yesterday we hugged.
Yeah, we did. I'm going to have to, Jane, I hugged Elise. Tell Cam that you hugged Nancy.
You're the only person I broke social distancing with, I want you to know.
Yeah.
And I did it. I did it yesterday.
Well, the other thing that happened is you gave me some beautiful heart-shaped chocolate cookies and cornbread cookies. So I figure that cancels out the exposing me to whatever we exposed each other to.
Yes. And I also returned to her a book called Slumming It at the Rodeo, which has nothing to do with sex. Okay. So I promised folks that there would be a giveaway today. And indeed, there is Nancy has stepped away, so I will just put. Oh, there you are. Will win this mug. I will mail it to you. Not the one I've been drinking out of. I have more of them over there. And I will send one to you. So I will, yeah, I will just put that back up there for a second in case anybody. Oh, goodness. Pardon me. I'm so sorry. Cynthia, thank you for telling me the sound is off. Whew, still learning how all this technology. um, yes, thank you, everybody. I got the sound on. Okay. What I was saying is there any advice, any lessons from the past as an activist for dealing with this moment? And maybe an easy way to answer that is like, do you come to this moment with any tools to help you through this really challenging time? You go ahead. Can you hear me? Oh, Nancy, can you not hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, good. Did you hear my question?
Oh, are you asking me?
Yes, I'm sorry. I
Oh, I
apologize.
thought, yeah, no, I think,
I
what I didn't realize you were asking me. I think probably what I would say is we are lied to about a lot of things. And among other things, we are lied to about how deep a tradition there are of mutual aid in our societies, of people taking really beautiful, good care of each other in organized and informal and informal ways. And, the fact that, we've had a government response to the pandemic that has had its usefulness, but really those deep bones of community connection, of love between people that's not based on kinship necessarily, but is those are showing in our culture right now. People taking care of each other, and people there's a lot of reaching out to strangers that's going on. So I mean, I think that it's a little like Naomi Klein's idea of disaster capitalism. Disaster capitalism first has to run roughshod over the strong traditions people have of taking care of their own community. So I think we do well to remember that that architecture, that deep caring, those deep caring systems that exist in our society that have nothing to do with the official institutions are actually showing their strength right now.
mm, thank you. That's really that's a great place to end things and a great thought to leave us all with. I really am so grateful to you, Nancy, for coming on. I always love talking to you. And I'm really glad for everybody out there who joined us. Our community is growing every week. And I'm so thrilled and happy to be able to do this because, I just get to sit around and talk about stuff I really like talking about. And that you join in on this conversation with us is just marvelous. It's just really wonderful. So please, as I say often every week, we're really hoping to bring the beauty and wonder that is community, lesbian, queer, women's community of the 70s and 80s. And it's not over, right? I mean, people like Nancy, and I feel like I'm a beneficiary of that. I don't mean to put it in the past, but that young people have the opportunity to connect with this incredibly rich and super interesting history. So if you can, please share this with young people that you know, and invite them to tune in and maybe have a watch party. And in fact, maybe I'll make that the giveaway contest for next week. If you bring a young person, and I'll define young person as under 30. If you bring a young person to come, then and everybody who does, I will send you a mug next week. So that's your contest for next week. I hope some of you have entered this week for a mug. We'll be happy to serve you up your morning whatever beverage, whatever it is you have. And so I will say one last thank you to you, Nancy.
Thank you to you, Elise, for doing this for all of us.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
great. It's so wonderful to be part of community, right? Like, it's amazing. And thank you, everybody. And we will, I hope, see you next week. I hope you have a marvelous week, and I hope you all find some way to celebrate tomorrow. Whatever kind of mothering experience matters to all of you. Okay, see you, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.